Hi, everyone. So we're just going to give everyone a chance to log on. We have quite a few people joining us. And so I'm going to give it about 3 minutes so everybody can make their way into the room. We have a full house today. While everyone is making it into the room, I will speak a little bit about housekeeping rules. One, you see a Q&A box at the bottom. Somewhere. Yep, there's a Q&A box. We already have some of your questions sent to us, and we would be very happy to answer those questions. But of course, we're going to be taking live questions. Questions are going to come up for you guys. We'd be very happy to respond. Number two, we will also be recording this session. This recording will be uploaded on the Lighthouse Arabia's YouTube channel. And it will probably take a couple days for us to do that. But if you go and follow the Lighthouse Arabia account, it will actually notify you. That's apparently how YouTube works. It notifies you if you follow the channel. I've never knew you could follow YouTube channels, but yes, that's what you can do. The third thing I will say that there is a chat box, so we can actually go back and forth to you guys can talk to the panelists. So there's a place where you can actually speak to us on the chat box, or you can just send your questions anonymously to us in the Q&A. If for any reason we drop off and I don't know, the Wi-Fi of the whole neighborhood goes down, come back. We are booked here until 7 p.m. and we will find a way to come back online, even if we have to use our hotspots to log back on. So we will do our very best. If not all of us, some of us will come back online. So, and that's that. And one more thing I would like to say, that this event actually is brought to you by Lighthouse Insight, which is our Instagram account for young adults. This is for teens and young adults, college students. And so we really would appreciate if you went and followed that account, because we really do put out some amazing content that is very, very relevant to this age group. So I'm gonna get started because it's been 5 minutes and people are still rolling in, but I just want to make sure that we have lots of time for questions. And so I hope everyone can hear me. Everyone, your videos can be off. You can be in bed in your pajamas because there's no one that can see you actually right now. You can only see us. We can't see you. So no need to turn on videos, no need to turn on voice, etc. So let me just quickly share some slides with you. And so we are now talking about careers in psychology, and we get these questions so many times. And so we just wanted to come to you guys with all of our information. I'll do a really quick introduction of all the panelists, but let me just tell you as to who we are before we go into the panelists, because we do have people joining us from all over the world, actually. And so just let me tell you a little bit about who the Lighthouse is. The Lighthouse is a community wellness center. We provide psychological and psychiatric care to children, adults, couples, and families. We also work a lot with corporations, schools, hospitals, and other institutions like government institutions. We've worked with the ministries to promote wellness and educate and do mental health first aid and all sorts of, mental health related stuff. We are also the home of the Rami Grief Center, which is a free of charge grief support service, which maybe Farah is going to share with you a little bit about, because she has been the keeper of that for many years before she took on mental health first aid, and she can tell you about that too. So we have a lot coming out of Farah. These are all the different services that we provide. We have, like I said, psychiatry, psychology. We also do neuropsychological assessments, which Dr. Rebecca is going to speak to you a little bit about. We do a lot of wellness talks, and we're really in the community, and more so in the last year we've spent a lot of time and energy on our different Instagram accounts, and I'm just going to name them really quickly, which is the Lighthouse Arabia account. If Farah, if you could type them as you have generously done before. We have the Smart Heart board game, which Christine is going to tell you a little bit about. The Smart Heart board game Instagram account. We have the Lighthouse Insight. We have Lighthearted Parenting. And then we have Dr. Saliha Afridi. So there's a lot we put out for the community through Instagram Lives and just some really well thought out research as well. So these are all the different things we do. And this is our team. We are probably at this time the largest house of psychologists within the region, and definitely one of the largest clinics in the region. We have 3 psychiatrists working with us and a lot of psychologists, master's and doctorate level. We have a clinical social worker, and then we also have speech and language therapy and occupational therapy. And we'll probably have another type of careers day for people that are interested in those allied services like occupational therapy and speech and language therapy. I'm not going to go into all of that because that's just taking way too long. And so now I will hand over to Rebecca, and she will kind of tell you guys what to expect for the rest of the evening.
Thank you, Saliha. Thanks everyone for joining us this evening. So the agenda for tonight is that we're going to have some brief introductions to all of the panel members. We will also then talk about the various pathways to becoming a master's or doctorate trained psychologist and psychiatrist. We've got Dr. Dax with us here today, who will talk to you all primarily about psychiatry. We will also talk about, each of us individually and as a group, we'll talk about a day in the life of, in our professions, in our roles, and specifically what we do at the clinic. And then we will open things up to the Q&A and discussion. I'm already receiving quite a few questions coming through the chat in the Q&A. So I will be allocating the questions as they come through to the various panelists who I think would be best to answer some of those questions given their backgrounds and their extensive experiences. And then as the coordinator of our internship program, I will talk to you about how that works, what programs we have, and all the specifics around that closer to the end of the session. And of course, any questions around internships, you're also welcome to send them through to the Q&A. And I will also be able to respond to some of those individually via email at a later time if we don't have time to answer those specific questions. So moving on to introduce...
Just a correction there. If we do not answer the questions, we will be answering all of these questions on Lighthouse Insight, on their stories. So if you follow that, you will find out all sorts of questions, and you're welcome to answer any questions that might come up even later for you as you dream about us tonight. And we, whatever comes up for you, we'd be happy to answer it tomorrow. So I think I'm starting the talk today, right? So actually go ahead and introduce all of us, Rebecca.
Yes, so I was just going to introduce you to obviously our main girl, Dr. Saliha Afridi, who's the Managing Director and Clinical Psychologist at the Lighthouse. Dr. Saliha is US trained. I will then be introducing myself as a clinical neuropsychologist and clinical psychologist at the Lighthouse, and I'm Australian trained. We have Dr. Frogley, who is British trained clinical psychologist. Farah, Dahabi, who is our clinical social worker, also American trained, and the director of our MHFA program, which some of you will be familiar with. And we have Kritsas, who is our master's level counseling psychologist from South Africa, and Dr. Stephan Dax, who is our consultant psychiatrist, trained in Germany, but worked all over the place. So he will tell you a little bit more about his varied experiences. And we will start off with Dr. Saliha.
Great. Oh, I'm not muted. That's scary. I could have been like, saying things and you guys all heard me. All right, guys, I'm going to keep it super quick because I've had a talk. It's also on YouTube if you want to know a little bit more about my story. But I graduated in the US, and I went to University of Michigan and got my bachelor's in anthropology. So here's a question that I get asked often. Do you have to study psychology in your undergrad? For the United States, you do not have to study psychology in your undergrad. And I would actually advise you not to, because then you are really locking yourself into a very narrow tunnel, and life is much more about many things. And I can tell you that I definitely use my experience of anthropology every single day when I'm working. So I got my bachelor's in anthropology, and I did my minor in the Chinese language, which is a fun fact for everyone to know. And I got my master's in clinical psychology at the Arizona School of Professional Psychology. And I got my PsyD, this is actually wrong, it should not say PhD, it should say PsyD in clinical psychology. Now, PsyD is different from PhD in the United States, and I'll tell you guys that a little bit later. So I got my PsyD in the Arizona school, and when I graduated from bachelor's, I went straight into my PsyD program, and I got my master's along the way. I have now been in Dubai since 2009, 2008, and so I've been here, well, quite a long time. And I founded the Lighthouse and Tara with Tara in 2011. And you know, the story is long when it comes to the Lighthouse and why we founded it. And so I don't want to take up too much time, but if you guys are interested, perhaps in the Q&A, I can tell you a little bit more, or you guys can go to my personal YouTube channel and I talk a little bit more about my journey into psychology. But the one thing that I will say about the Lighthouse is that it was not born out of a place of, hey, there's a business need here and let's serve that business need. It really was born out of, there is a need here for something that is bigger, that needs to be served, and that is the clinical, the community needs that are not being met. And Rami, it really comes out of Rami. And so like I said, I could go on, and I don't want to take up too much time. My expertise, I graduated, I got my dissertation with an expertise in parenting. So I did a parenting program, and I really had a passion for parenting for quite some time. And then I would say over the last 5 to 7 years, my focus has shifted into the workplace, burnout, mental health within the workplace, and then working with C-suite and managing partners and partner level service professional services providers. So that's kind of the world I come from. Lighthouse is my light, and it is my life also, and I love it, and I love my team, and I love everything that we're doing, and I look forward to hearing all of the other stories that will tell you a little bit more about what we do here at the Lighthouse. So that's my educational background. That's what I do. Oh, I didn't say that I'm the MD for now at the Lighthouse. And then, yeah, I'd be happy to answer any of your questions later.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Rebecca Steingiesser. I'm a clinical neuropsychologist and clinical psychologist here at the Lighthouse. I'm doctorate trained from Australia. And as you'll see at the top there, I serve at the clinic as the assessment team lead and the internship program lead. And I'm seeing loads of questions coming in about the internship, so hopefully I'll be able to address some of those in a moment. So just a little bit about my educational background. So I graduated from high school in Australia and went straight into a Bachelor of Arts psychology program. So in Australia, the Bachelor of Arts program, you can do psychology under a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science, and I was much more interested in the humanities side of things, so I chose to do mine under arts program. And it's a 3-year course with an additional year of an honours program, so 4 years altogether. And I did that at the University of Western Australia. And then I took a year off to gather some experience and worked as a research associate and study coordinator for Alzheimer's disease research service, and then joined the dual doctorate program at the same university that at the time was offering a doctorate in clinical neuropsychology and clinical psychology. So after graduating, I moved to Dubai and joined the Lighthouse. I was the second employee and very, very fresh, straight out of uni essentially. And I worked kind of more so as an intern and worked as both doing assessment assessments under the supervision of Dr. Saliha, and as a clinical psychologist under the supervision of our clinical director, Dr. Tara. After leaving, sadly leaving Dubai to move back to Australia, I worked part-time as a pediatric neuropsychologist and clinical psychologist at a family clinic in Melbourne, back in Australia, and then moved to Perth, where I was originally trained, and then joined a neurosciences specific unit, a statewide service that I've served on as the coordinator of the pediatrics team. So I provided clinical neuropsychology assessments, supervision of doctorate students throughout that time. And I then moved back to Dubai and joined the Lighthouse again. And in that time, I practiced as both a neuropsychologist and clinical psychologist. As I said earlier, I'm the leader of our assessment service, where I provide supervision to our psychology associates, but also to our assessment team. And I'm coordinator in part with the lovely Aisling on the internship program. So I am dual licensed as both a clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist in Australia with the Australian Psychology Board, or also known as APRA. And I am licensed as a clinical psychologist with the DHA here in Dubai. So that's just a bit about me.
Hi guys, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Catherine Frogley and I'm from the UK and I'm a clinical psychologist, as you know already by now. I'm also the education lead, or one of the education leads rather, at the Lighthouse, which is the service really that thinks about the child and adolescent mental health services that we provide at the Lighthouse and beyond, and how we support schools to cater to their children and their students' mental health, how we support the school staff as well. And I also lead the project that develops the Lighthouse Insight Instagram account. So if you do have questions, I'm just going to reiterate, please do send us any questions actually related to careers, but also to anything related to mental health on that account, because we really want that account to be for you guys. So coming to my background, so I did do an undergraduate degree in psychology, and actually in the UK that is necessary if you do want to practice as a clinical psychologist. So unfortunately, if you are looking in the UK, you will have to do an undergraduate degree, but sometimes you can do another degree and then do a master's psychology degree to take you to be able to then go on to the doctorate program. I then went on to do the doctorate in clinical psychology. And again, in the UK, to practice as a clinical psychologist, you do have to do the doctorate in clinical psychology. There are lots of different options to do different forms of psychology work. So you could be a researcher and do a PhD, or you could go into organizations and support organizations to think about mental health. But to practice clinically, working with clients and patients, you have to do a doctorate in clinical psychology in the UK at least. I included some of the things that I did prior to my training, just because I think it's really important that if you are looking into being a psychologist, especially in the UK, but perhaps worldwide, it is really important to get different types of experiences. So I did many volunteer jobs in lots of different areas before I was able to get onto the training. I also worked as an assistant psychologist and a research assistant, and that was one of the best experiences I had to really know, is this the career that I want to go down? And also to give that experience that would really help me on to the doctorate. And then following my doctorate program, I worked in various different services in the UK. So I worked within Great Ormond Street Hospital. I've always been very passionate about child and adolescent mental health. That's where I wanted to start my career. So I went to a children's hospital, two children's hospitals, in fact, in the UK. I also worked as part of an adoption service, part-time, supporting young people who had been adopted in the UK and looking after their mental health and helping that family integrate. And then I also started as a part-time role, developing my own private practice in the UK, which was focused on trauma and supporting people who'd been through things like car accidents and other forms of trauma, where that was my mainstay of that role. And then I made the excellent decision to move to Dubai. And I moved to Dubai for the Lighthouse because I saw them and I thought, if I'm going there, that's the only place I'm going. And now they can't get rid of me. So I've been here 2 years now, and I will be here long term.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Farah, and I'm the only clinical social worker. So my background, I went to the same alumni University of Michigan for my bachelor's program as Dr. Saliha. So go blue. So my bachelor's degree was in psychology, quite general. I had no idea what I wanted to do at that time in my life. I just knew I was very curious about people and their feelings and their thoughts. I then did some research in undergrad on the impact of social exclusion. I also was looking at the impact of depression on older adults, particularly Muslim older adults. I then went on to do my master's program. So it was a master's of clinical social work, and I specialized in geriatrics and medical social work, and particularly disability was something I was very passionate about. I also did a minor in human resources in my master's program. And so for clinical social work, not all social work means you're doing therapy or counseling. Many social workers will work in nonprofits or do case management or work in hospitals. But if you want to do counseling or therapy, you must have a clinical focus. And I did a specialist in aging program, which was all about working with disability and older adults. I did at one point, I was a mentor for juvenile delinquent girls. That was more in my undergrad program. And after I graduated, I worked at an outpatient mental health clinic, and I was working with homebound older adults where there was a lot of disability, a lot of grief work, and adults who were living with disability. And that's where a lot of passion for grief work and trauma started for me. I then moved to Dubai and started seeing clients at the Lighthouse, the best decision I ever made in my life. And during that time, I also started leading the Rami Grief Center for about 3 years. And this still remains my favorite thing to do in all of my work at the Lighthouse. And the Grief Center is home to the only grief center in the region, and we provide one free session to anyone who's grieving, where we speak about what is grief, what's normal to feel, and how to support or how to heal in a healthy way. And that session is also a gateway into our free of charge grief support groups that we have, and we run those throughout the year. And it's the grief support groups are still my favorite thing to do. And then after about 3 years, I also lead our mental health first aid program. And this is basically the equivalent of physical first aid for mental health. And really, when you're thinking about clinical social work, a central theme is social justice. So there's a passion for working with stigmatized populations, which can be mental health, disability, poverty, racism. And really, this is where my alignment with Lighthouse came, because there is a central theme of community. You can't just work with clients without thinking about what the community may need and larger social justice issues. I am licensed in the state of Michigan and by the Community Development Authority in Dubai.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kritsas. I'm a counseling psychologist and education director at Lighthouse Arabia. And over the past 13 years, I've been working extensively with children, families, and adults in private practice. And about 4.5 years ago, I moved over to Dubai from Cape Town in South Africa. And also one of the best decisions I could make. I think there's a trend here. And my education background is that I did a DPsych degree, which is the honors equivalent back in South Africa. It was a 4-year degree, but one of the most popular routes to take is to do a undergrad in psychology, which is a 3-year bachelor's, and then to apply for your honors, which they usually select around 40 to 50 candidates just based off of your marks specifically, and then to apply for the master's program, which is what I did at the University of the Free State, which is a 2-year program, which included theory and practical. And if you were to do a master's in clinical psych, it would be those 2 years plus a Zuma year. And then if you were to go on and do your doctorate in South Africa, it could be a minimum of 2 years, a maximum of 5 years if you did it full-time, or 6 years if you did it part-time. My professional background, I would say that back in South Africa, I did a lot of family work. I was an accredited family mediator. So I brought that a lot into my work with families, working extensively with parents. And it was through my work with children in the playroom that the idea of creating a children's board game came to light. And so I'm very passionate about creating platforms for children to express themselves and to give children as well as adults tools to improve their EQ. Yes, adults can also improve their EQ. And so that has been something that I have been very passionate about, and something that I continue to do alongside my work as a therapist. I also run some support groups for parents, and I contribute to the content on the Lighthearted Parenting Instagram account, as well as the Smart Heart board game account. And about 4 years ago, I got trained in mental health first aid, which Farah spoke about earlier. And that is something that I do a lot of in the corporate sphere. And I'm licensed by the Health Professions Council in South Africa, as well as the Development Authority in Dubai.
You're on mute, Stephen. Nope, still muted.
My apologies.
Okay.
That shows that I'm the newest member here, not so quite familiar with technology as everybody else, I believe. I just came to Dubai in January of this year, and I'm very excited to actually be working here in Dubai and to be working at the Lighthouse. Obviously, my experience here is somewhat limited, but I must say, in comparison to all the other experience I have had in my lifetime, I'm very much looking forward to gathering more experience here and working at the Lighthouse. I'm from Germany originally. I didn't know what to do following my baccalaureate degree in Germany. So I went to China for 2 years and studied Chinese, and then had the idea of going into medicine, because I thought it's certainly an area which would allow me to work internationally and make me quite independent. So I started studying medicine actually in China. I returned to Germany and studied at the University of Frankfurt, Johann Wolfgang Goethe University, where I also got my medical degree from. And during the final year of my studies in Germany, I went to New York City to do an internship, which I did at the Mount Sinai Medical Center. I found that very exciting. I found the work environment there very inspiring. And I was invited back to do my residency training in New York and at the Mount Sinai Medical Center. So I did that. The residency in psychiatry is a 4-year program, and automatically essentially leads to the graduate being a consultant. Subsequently, because I had interests in the elderly and also in forensic psychiatry, I did fellowship trainings in geriatric and forensic psychiatry, also in New York. I was then again at determination, a place in my life where I didn't know exactly what to do, and I had the opportunity of working in Australia, working in the US in a medically underserved area to obtain a green card or returning to Germany. And I decided that I wanted to have more experience rather than immediately starting to work as a psychiatrist. So I returned to Germany and worked as Assistenzarzt in Nuremberg. Then also got the equivalent to a consultant in Germany, and subsequently returned to New York to work as a forensic psychiatrist for the city of New York. I did that for about 2 years, after which I decided to seek experiences elsewhere again. I returned to Europe. I worked mostly in the United Kingdom in both, in adult psychiatry, in forensic psychiatry, and also in geriatric psychiatry. I worked for the military of defense in the UK for about 5 years altogether. And then in 2015, I worked in China for 1 year prior to returning to the UK, and then deciding last year that I wanted to get more experience elsewhere. My professional background is that I'm triple board certified by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology and general geriatric and forensic psychiatry. I hold specialist registration in adult and old age psychiatry in the UK, and I'm what is called Facharzt consultant in psychiatry and psychotherapy in Germany. During my training, I also, through a former colleague of mine, did a training in logotherapy or existential analysis and became a diplomat in logotherapy, particular form of psychotherapy, which I found very helpful in my practice as well, because I never found it very exciting to limit my practice to merely prescribing medication. I think one is rather ineffective as a psychiatrist if one only prescribes medication without being able to establish a good and appropriate therapeutic alliance with patients, and a psychotherapeutic training certainly helps in that respect.
Wow. I just learned a lot about you. There were so many things I didn't know, like the details. I was like, what is that really long word down there in German? But that's so cool.
And you interviewed me.
Thank you, Dr. Dax. So now there's like 100 questions about this particular issue. So we're gonna break it down for you guys. And I'm gonna talk about what it means to get a master's, a PsyD, and a PhD in the United States. Then we are going to have all the other clinicians tell you about master's and doctorate degrees. I don't know if Australia has all of that, but I think it'd be important for Rebecca. She'll be sharing with you guys what do you need to do in order to become a neuropsychologist. And then Catherine, there's a lot of people asking questions about, you know, what is this PhD? What is this DClinPsy? And then Christine and Farah will also share about their experiences about getting their master's, and should they go counseling? Should they go clinical? Should they go clinical social worker? How do you make that decision? So I would be very happy to now go into the master's, the PsyD, and the PhD. So as you guys all saw me really early on, you saw me actually saying, well, I'm not a PhD, I'm a PsyD. So in the United States, there are, you know, usually when you are getting your bachelor's, you do not have to declare your major to be a psychology major, obviously. And some programs even prefer it that you don't have your background in psychology major. And they want you to have like an interesting story. They don't want you to have made up your mind when you were 4 years old. And so it just really depends on what college you guys are applying to. And this is something that you probably want to speak to some of the guidance people within that college. Talk to the guidance counselors when it comes to the guidance counselors in the bachelor's. You know, I really am looking to do my master's. What's my way? So it will really depend on what university. I can only tell you about the people that I know and myself, and none of us got our psychology degrees as our undergraduate. My younger sister, who also works at the Lighthouse, also is a psychologist, master's level, and she did not have her undergraduate in psychology either. So I personally don't think you should. I simply think that you should do where your heart sort of goes. And if that is psychology, then go ahead and take it. But don't think about, well, what's going to get me into that master's program? What's going to get me into that doctorate program? Do what your heart feels like is the right thing to do. And that might be biology. That might be communications. All I can say is if it's anything to do with human beings, you're going to do well in psychology, because that's what it is. It's the study of the human psyche. It's the study of the human mind, and it's never going to go to waste. So that's the bachelor's degree. The master's degree, when you enter into the master's program, there are universities. So UC Berkeley, Harvard, the Ivy Leagues, you have, just colleges and universities. These are basically public universities. Then you have private universities, but then you also have programs such as the program that I'm talking about, which is basically a private university in which you can enter after your bachelor's program. So once I graduated, I worked for a year and a half doing marketing, and it was just not something that spoke to my soul. And so I said, I'm going to go study psychology. It didn't happen like that, but I'm getting to the point here. And I decided I was going to study psychology. And when I studied, I didn't enter a public university like University of California or University of Houston or I didn't do that. I said, I'm looking to get my doctorate in psychology. And I just got lucky. I really didn't have anyone guiding me, and we definitely didn't have panels like this. And I just Googled doctorate in psychology, and I just happened to land on one where I was living, which was Phoenix at the time. And thank God it was an APA approved program, because I didn't even know that I needed to look for that. So in the US, you have, so I wish I had a flow chart to draw for you here, but there's a bachelor's, and after the bachelor's, you can go into your master's. After the master's, you can go into your doctorate. This is one path, okay? The second path is you have your bachelor's, and you can jump right in to a PsyD program. PsyD is a doctorate in clinical psychology, and that's held at a private university. Now, why would everyone not just do that? Well, the private universities are probably 5 times more expensive than the public universities. And so you're going to be really paying out from your pocket, and the acceptance rate is a little bit higher. So you're literally moving into, this is more of a business arrangement where they've got some really superior professors, but it's still a business in the end. Where the public universities, that's why you have University of Michigan or University of California, a lot of research is what gets them their funding. So we don't have to pay as the student to make sure that the teachers get paid. They get their funding through writing books, they get their funding through doing research. We did not do any research in the PsyD program, okay? So the PsyD program in the United States, guys, you guys are asking questions about the UK. You will get to the UK. This is about the United States. So I'm just stopping here that you will have all of these questions answered about the UK, but I'm only focusing on the United States right now. Dr. Catherine will tell you about the UK, okay? So when you enter the PsyD program, you have an option to go from bachelor's to PsyD. Now, like I said, it's going to cost you money, but I decided to get my master's along the way, and it's like a slight detour. You get maybe 4 or 5 classes over the summer. I took them. So I had a master's, and then I got my PsyD along the way. So I entered into the PsyD program, and I got my bachelor's along the way. There are some people like my sister, who didn't want to get her doctorate. So she just basically entered into a master's level program, and that's where she stopped, and that's what she got. So it's very different depending on what your long-term trajectory is when it comes to this career. So that's the PhD university, a lot cheaper. And the people that are selected for the PhD program are actually very few. So you might have a class of 10 for the whole year. So it's highly competitive to get into the PhD program, where the PsyD program is not as competitive. It is still competitive because a lot of people want to be psychologists, but they might accept 30 people in that year. So I had like 15 people in my cohort, and they had another 15 people in the fall cohort. So they do 2 times acceptance, or you move in, and once in the fall and once in the winter. So we had a class of 30 people where they have a class of 10. So it's a lot more, a lot less competitive, I would say. You still have to take the GRE, you still have to go for your interviews, you still have to do dissertation. However, in the PsyD program, it is not heavy on research. This is what I preferred. I did not want to do research. I really just wanted to be in the ground. I mean, not in the ground, although it almost put me in the ground, but I wanted to be on the ground. I wanted to do the work with people from the very get-go. And within 6 months of me starting my PsyD program, I was sitting in a room in front of a client, and that's where my training began. So that for me was a very much exciting part of being a psychologist. Research is not the thing that drives me. It actually drives me crazy, but it doesn't drive me. So those are the differences between master's, PhD. In the United States, by the way, you cannot get a PhD unless you have a master's. You can get a PsyD if you don't have a master's. You jump right into that program. I personally did not do any internships I was always volunteering, and I, read to the blind, and I was very active within our school organization, and I did all sorts of these things. But my advice to many of you guys who are asking this question, and I really urge you to think about this question, which is, what's the best way for me to get into a doctorate program? And I really encourage you not to live life like that, because you have to do it if it feels right to you, and that will end you up in the right place. But if you constantly keep doing things to fill up your CV, it's gonna look hollow, and they're gonna sense that when you sit in front of them in an interview. But they're gonna feel your passion. And I had no clinical experience when I sat in front of my doctorate committee to get that interview. But I was like, I'm gonna change the world, I'm gonna do it, and I need this degree, so you better just let me in. And they were like, okay, that's a good story. And then I got in. So really just focus on what drives you and what gives you pleasure, and that will weave into psychology one way or another. I promise you that, because everything is related to psychology. So those are the different pathways. Now, people do ask, well, what about neuropsychology? What about forensic psychology? And I'll just quickly mention that those are concentrations that you can do as a clinical psychologist. So I would need maybe 2 years more under training, but there's no license for neuropsychology necessarily in the United States, but you do have expertise in neuropsychology and forensic psychology through concentrated training, which is postgraduate training in these specific programs. So if you guys want to know more about my training, you can watch the YouTube video, but these are the main pathways for the United States. And now I'm going to hand over the baton to Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. So I will talk to you, because I'm dual trained, I'll talk to you about the doctorate programs that they offer in Australia. I want to say also that just like in the US, Australia is a really big country, and every state has different bodies, but we do have a unifying psychology board, the Australian Health Regulation Authority, AHPRA. And so all accredited universities in Australia require you to be eligible to get licensed with this body. So all the universities in Australia are accredited with AHPRA, with the Psychology Board, but every university offers different programs and different streams for psychology. More recently, over the last, I would say, 5 to 6 years, a lot of the university programs in Australia are no longer providing the doctorate programs, the DPsych program that I'm trained in, and they simply offer the master's or a combined master's PhD stream. So I'll explain a little bit more about those. When I went through the training program, in order to be eligible, you had to complete an undergraduate degree with a double major in psychology. So in order to do that, you would have to do it either under an arts degree or under a science degree. And so as you went through your undergraduate course, you would be able, over the course of the years and semesters, you would have a certain number of core psychology units that you would have to do as part of your training. So by the time you got to your third year of the undergraduate psychology degree, you would be only doing psychology units. And those are psychology units in third year that would be preparing you for honours. The honours programs are exceptionally competitive. So there is an expectation that you get a certain score level at the end, a GPA, but also just generally there's certain units, particular statistics and certain other units that you have to do very well in to be eligible, because it's a much smaller cohort of people who are accepted into the honours program. So when there may be 600 or so students doing undergraduate psychology at UWA when I was doing it, there was only 60 spaces for honours students. So it was really, really competitive. And one thing I think a lot of people don't realise is that the stream in psychology to go from step to step is actually very competitive, and you have to maintain a very high grade level in order to be eligible for all the next steps. In my university, the thing that we had to do was to get a first class or a first class lower level, which is like a 1B or something, or 2A plus, which is basically first class or just below, in order to be eligible to apply for a master's or a doctorate program at my university. Of course, there were other universities that had less stringent application processes or expectations on students' grades and what level they got in their honours. The honours program involves a thesis and coursework. So, and it's the overall score that you get is a combination of both of the grades that you get in either of those two. Once you have completed an honours program, you can go out and work, but you cannot go out and work as a psychologist. So years back, for those who chose not to do any postgraduate psychology and psychology courses, and I'm talking maybe 20 or so years ago in Australia, you could do internships that then lead to licensure as a psychologist, but you can only call yourself a psychologist without counselling or clinical or any other titles that go with it. And that required you to be doing supervised training with a clinical supervisor for 4 years or 2 to 4 years. So it was quite a long process, and you don't get paid as much as a person who would go through the master's program. And that became very tricky when the master's and doctorate programs were created in universities in Australia. So that meant that people who were graduating from master's and doctorate programs were earning more and were also more attractive candidates for jobs. So since then now, they no longer offer what they call the 4+2, the 4+2 being 4 years of undergraduate training plus a 2-year internship or high-level supervised posting. And now they're primarily only licensing people who have a master's degree, a DPsych, which is what I have, which is a 3-year program, or a master's PhD, which is a 4-year program. So the master's program is a 2-year program, and you can be eligible to apply with a doctorate, with a first class honours, to get into a 2-year master's program, which is coursework, a thesis, a smaller thesis, and practicums, where you would actually go into clinics, hospitals, and other settings and actually get supervised experience with clients. And that would work with whether you choose to do neuropsychology, counseling psychology, or clinical psychology. The doctorate program, the DPsych program, is a 3-year course, which is essentially just more in-depth training. You get more practicum experience, and your thesis is larger. So you have a research component that is almost as big as a PhD, I would say. And the program is around 3 years. once you graduate from a DPsych, you get to be called a doctor of psychology. People who are primarily interested in research psychology choose to go via the PhD route, but you cannot practice clinically, in that you cannot do therapy or provide clinical services as a psychologist with a research degree, with a PhD. However, if you do a master's PhD, which has the same level of training as a doctorate in terms of clinical training and clinical experience, the PhD then allows you to work as an academic if you choose to work in a university, but or if you want to have a split role in your profession doing academia and research, but also working clinically with clients. So those are the three main programs that they offer in Australia. And now they're moving towards more of a US-based system where the undergraduate programs are open. So just like you can do a postgraduate medical degree without having done medicine as an undergraduate, you are now able to do a postgraduate psychology degree without having done a specific psychology undergraduate degree. But it is different in that the expectations are higher. I don't know very much about it because it's very, very new. It's probably in the last 2 to 3 years that they're starting to shift that scope. As a neuropsychologist, you can do, just like I said, a master's in clinical neuropsychology, a doctorate in clinical neuropsychology, or a master's PhD in clinical neuropsychology. For some people who have done a clinical psychology doctorate, you can do an additional training, like a more specialized diploma in neuropsychology, but that is also, it's almost like an additional postgraduate training and like an additional master's degree. So that is a lot of information about training in Australia, but like I said, every state in Australia is different, and so it's really, really important if you're looking to apply for courses in Australia to actually contact the universities and ask lots and lots of questions. Sometimes you'll find a registrar at the university who's really easy to talk to and open and will answer all of your questions, but make sure you ask for the manuals and the handbooks and actually find out what you can get from the course, and if you're actually interested in the coursework that they offer in those different programs. That's it for me.
So Catherine, why don't you go, because there's a lot of questions about UK degrees, whether they're master's or doctorate. So why don't you go next, and then we'll take the others afterwards.
Okay. So it's great to hear that people are interested in studying in the UK. And I think the UK is a little bit different to the US and Australia. So first of all, in a different way to what Dr. Saliha has said, you do have to have an undergraduate in psychology to take the next steps to becoming, if you want to be a clinical psychologist. So you don't have to have done your undergraduate, but you do have to have a conversion master's degree that is accredited by the British Psychological Society. So let's say you do anthropology as your undergrad, but you decide, actually, I want to be a psychologist, you will have to do at least a 1-year conversion degree to make that a undergraduate in psychology to take those next steps. So that's the first thing. Secondly, you can go on to do a master's in psychology, and there are lots of different types of masters that you could do. There are masters in clinical psychology. However, you cannot practice as a clinical psychologist with a master's in the UK. So it is more of a stepping stone to help you get onto the doctorate or to help you find other sources of work. But if you want to be a clinical psychologist, which means seeing clients, doing therapeutic work, a master's alone will not enable you to do that in the UK, whereas in other places, perhaps it would. So the typical path is that you do your undergraduate psychology degree, and then you gather some time to get some experience, because the big difference with the doctorate in psychology in the UK is that it's funded by the government. So you don't have to pay a penny. In fact, you are paid a wage to be a clinical psychology doctorate student in the UK. And that is a big, big difference, and it makes it very, very, very competitive. So that means that you're competing with a lot of people who want to get on that program, which means that in order to shine out to the hundreds of people that are applying, you really have to show that you have you're serious about your career in psychology, that you've gone away and you found some good experience, you know what it's like to be a psychologist, you've spent some time being supervised or watching the work of a clinical psychologist, and you've got a wealth of experience, essentially. Now, sometimes people spend many, many years trying to get onto the Doctorate Psychology program, but sometimes I don't actually think it is about the number of years or the number of different experiences you've had. It's how you tell that story, a little bit like what Dr. Saliha had said about her story. It's not necessarily I have to get so many years. It's more what you take from that experience and how you put that into your personal statement and how you showcase that when you go for your interviews. But I won't lie, it is very, very competitive. And I know people that have spent 5-6 years applying every year and unfortunately not getting onto the course. Now, you are only eligible to get that paid training and to be paid a salary to do the clinical psychology program if you are a resident and citizen in the UK, which some of you may be. You may have a UK passport, but if you're an international student, then you're not eligible for that funding. And so you will have to pay individually to do that program. And there are a set number of international student places in each university. And I think there are more and more because there is a talk currently in the UK about whether or not they will continue to fund it. But currently they are funding it, and this is why it's very, very competitive. So you don't have to do a master's to get onto that doctorate program, but sometimes people choose to do a master's because it helps them to develop and hone their skills in a particular area, or it's something that really interests them, or perhaps they're not necessarily sure that they want to do the doctorate, but they do want to continue with that passion in psychology. So you don't have to do a master's, and I saw a couple of people asking that, but it can be something that if it feels right for you and there's something that you really want to learn more about, then that might be something that you want to consider. So the other, if for people who are interested in forensic psychology or something called educational psychology, which are clinical in nature, but are different to working as a clinical psychologist, there are also separate doctorate pathways for these two areas of psychology. Now, of course, they mean that you're very specialized straight away, whereas as a clinical psychologist, you're trained to be quite a generalist. So it's 3 years and you have placements in my university, we had placements within adult, within learning disability, with older adults, with children and adolescents. And then in the final year, you choose a specialism that you want to go into. And alongside your uni kind of lectures that you might expect in a doctoral program, you are also doing a major research project. So again, that's a little bit different to the PsyD in the US. You will be doing a major research project, and there is an expectation that that is a certain level and that you think about kind of publishing that work. It's rigorous, it's a good piece of research. And alongside that, you're doing your clinical placements and you're being evaluated for the therapy and the therapeutic work that you're doing. So that's the doctorate in clinical psychology. But as I said, there is also educational psychology doctorates, which are not funded, but are 3 years and are run similar to the clinical psychology program. But they focus on education aspects of psychology. So they are focusing more on kind of neuropsych assessment and how to support students within the school environment. It's less about clinical mental health difficulties. There is also the forensic psychology doctorate program. Again, it's not funded. It's something that you fund yourself, although in some cases there are some organizations that might. So a place where I worked was a forensic hospital, and they funded 1 or 2 places a year. So if you're lucky and you're in the right job and you show interest, you might be able to get that funded. And again, that can take longer because it tends to be on a part-time basis while you work, but it's somewhere between 3 to 5 years. And again, you do clinical placements, but all of your experience is in forensic services, so prisons, forensic hospitals where there has been a crime that has happened as a result of that person's mental health difficulties. So that is another option for you. There is also counseling psychology doctorate, which again is similar to the clinical psychology doctorate, but it's not funded and it looks slightly different. But that is another option for you if you're thinking about what kind of a psychologist do I want to be. I think that's all, but if there's any questions that people can see about the UK, please.
Rebecca and Catherine, if you guys can type out answers, because there were a lot of questions that came through. So I'm just going to let you guys keep typing those away. And then Farah or Christine, one of you guys can go, and then we'll let Dr. Dax go. I just want to be mindful of time because we are at 6:30, and I just want to make sure that we get to the licensing part, because that's quite an important question for a lot of people.
So as I mentioned earlier, in South Africa, there is the 3-year undergrad bachelor's in psychology that you would do, and then you would go on to apply for honors. They usually select between 40 to 50 applicants for the honors. There was a question that came through earlier about, do you need an honors in order to do a master's? Yes, you do. In South Africa, and I think anywhere in the world, you would need to be able to have very good grades in an honors degree for that application process to do a master's, which is a 2-year program. In South Africa, you can apply for a clinical psychology master's, counseling psychology, or educational psychology. And I went the counseling psychology route. I would advise that if you were to do it in South Africa, that you do a clinical psychology route over counseling psychology, just because they've started narrowing the scope of practice for counseling psychology in South Africa. And they are quite, particular about what you can and can't do. And so just to broaden your opportunities, I would say clinical psych over counseling psych. And then if you were to go on and do a doctorate, it would be a minimum of 2 years, a maximum of 5 years if you were doing it full-time, and 6 years if you were doing it part-time. And oh, sorry, I would just say that in South Africa, there are about 8 universities that you can apply for. But the forensic psychology is not a registered category. There isn't a registered category for that in South Africa at present.
Sorry, Christine.
Oh.
So to become a master's of social work, you need to have a bachelor's in social work or a bachelor's in psychology. And I will say, everyone told me not to do social work. They said, you're never going to make any money, don't do it. And I will say that when you follow your passion and you follow your heart, you will never be poor in your life. And I really believe that. So don't be deterred from social work. But so you do need to have a bachelor's. And I guess I'll speak about licensure after when we get there.
Dr. Dax, you want to tell us how to become a doctor in Germany? Is it a long path? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah. No, not any longer. No, and in general, it may be a little bit difficult to get into university, into a faculty of medicine in Germany. And there are different, certainly when I was a student, different pathways of doing that, either by the marks in a baccalaureate degree, or your name was on a waiting list, or you were interviewed and found to be particularly suitable for university. So there are different ways of students being admitted to a faculty of medicine. I think also in realization of the fact that the brightest students don't necessarily make the best doctors, and medicine is not a perfect science like mathematics is or physics is. So you need to have a sense of empathy, a sense of passion, and I think that is actually increasingly understood in Germany, and that plays a role in being admitted to university. my opinion is once you are in university, you can essentially relax because ultimately you will have to pass, of course, a series of examinations, but ultimately you will become a doctor. You can actually additionally then pursue a PhD. Some people do that. You need to have a passion for research or enough time to set aside. I chose not to do that. I did actually study Chinese and Japanese and German when I attended medical school in Germany. I found that far more interesting. I was enrolled in a PhD program during medical school as well in neurosurgery of all areas, which really had nothing to do with psychiatry, and it didn't interest me, and I dropped out in order to pursue more where my passion, where I found my passion, and that was really in languages and getting to know foreign cultures, which ultimately is also what brought me here. I got to the US quite easily and by chance, because I had a very good friend who studied at New York University, journalism, not medicine, and he got me interested in applying for a sort of internship, brief internship at Mount Sinai Medical Center, and I was then invited to do my residency training. I think normally getting into a residency training, there is a matching program in the United States, and I think it can be quite competitive. I had some junior doctors in the UK to whom I was a mentor who did that, and they were often not immediately successful, but ultimately were accepted into programs. And there is a joke that if you are enrolled in a residency training program, you don't kill yourself and you don't kill anybody else, then ultimately you will become a psychiatrist, and you will.
I still laugh at that one.
And I think, you know, throughout my life, I followed my passion in terms of really working in different countries and working in different areas of psychiatry. I am licensed in the United States. I've always maintained my license. I'm licensed in Germany. I held a license in China, which was valid for the duration of my appointment to a private clinic in China. I'm now licensed in the DHA, and I have a license in the UK as well, which really offers, I think, the opportunity to really explore different areas of the world. What struck me in the UK is that, and also in Germany, that a lot of people went to university in a particular area, graduated, and then started working, and there was hardly any mobility. And I always thought that if I followed the same pathway, it would actually lead to very rapid burnout. I would become disinterested. I would lack passion for psychiatry. I would become less effective as a psychiatrist. And I think, you know, getting experience and being interested in learning, that I think is what makes a good doctor and makes a good psychiatrist. The only difficulty I generally see in a path to becoming a psychiatrist is really getting into medical school, but there are different ways of doing that. And obviously, you know, it can also be done in different countries, not merely in Germany.
I love that. Thank you, Dr. Dax. And you know, really it is a testament to what of an interesting stories you have, really, that you were just open to all of those experiences. And so you're probably like the most interesting psychiatrist ever because of like all of these stories that you have, because sometimes they can get quite one-dimensional, especially in the United States, where it's very much a medical model and it's very much about seeing patients and prescribing and then out, and then these 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30-minute appointments. And that can get really dull. And so the fact that you actually did your residency and, you know, were in the United States and you still stayed true to your love for clients and your interest in therapies, I just think that's really cool. So
I do agree. I would find it very, very boring to actually examine clients for like 10 or 15 minutes and prescribe a medication. And I really think it often doesn't make much of a difference because it's not medication alone which cures someone. It's really the therapeutic alliance established with somebody and accompanying somebody on a journey to healing rather than sending somebody as quickly as possible out of your office with a prescription for some medication.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Dr. Dax. Thank you so much for that. So guys, now I don't want to tell you about a day in the life of, because you guys have other questions that seem to be a little bit more relevant. And if you guys really want to know what it's like to be in the day of our lives, then we can talk about that at the end. But I want to make sure that I talk about licensing because that seems to be a really big issue for a lot of people. So what does it take in order for you to get your license and practiced within the UAE? Now, I cannot speak confidently about DHCC, but I'm actually not even going to talk about the UAE. I'm going to talk about Dubai. In Dubai, there are 4 licensing bodies, and I can't speak about Ministry of Health because there are some hospitals that have Ministry of Health licensing. I actually don't know much about that. There is DHCC, which is Dubai Healthcare City, which literally acts like its own little jurisdiction, and they have their own licensing laws. And I do know that if you have a postgraduate diploma from some European countries or from the UK, for example, you can get licensed in DHCC, but you would not be able to get licensed in DHA or in CDA. So I'm only speaking about Dubai, and I'm only going to speak about these 2 clinical sort of authorities, which is the Community Development Authority and Dubai Health Authority. Now, when you move to the United Arab Emirates, you are going to have a master's or a doctorate in counseling psychology, clinical social work, or you're going to go into clinical psychology. Okay, those are the 2 pathways. Now, in the United States, you cannot see clients with a master's in clinical psychology. Master's in clinical psychology is just a path for you to get a doctorate in clinical psychology, but you can be a psychometrician. A psychometrician is basically someone who delivers the tests, and then they bring it to Dr. Rebecca, who will do the analysis and the diagnostics of that test. So they just do the psychological testing, but they are not allowed to give any type of diagnoses. You can actually work, which I don't think you should, but you can. I know people who do have their license with a clinical psychology degree from the United States. So usually when you go to the DHA, they are just looking, do you have a doctorate or do you have a master's in clinical psychology? And did you do 2 years of experience once you graduated from that program? So if you graduated in 2008, did you work in the United States till 2010 before arriving into Dubai to actually get a license? They will not, the DHA will not license you if you have not gotten those 2 years. The DHCC might be a different story. So you can go get that story from someone who works in DHCC. We don't know about DHCC. So I'm only talking about DHA. So DHA, you don't have to remember much. Master's, clinical psych, doctorate, clinical psych, 2 years, done. Okay. Now the CDA is a little bit trickier. The CDA has a licensing requirement that actually needs you to get your degrees attested from the Ministry of Education. And that degree can be a master's in counseling, doctorate in counseling psychology, social work, clinical social work. These are the ones that are relevant, okay? So you have to have these degrees in order to go through CDA. The process of going through ministry equalization can be quite hectic, and it could take quite some time. And then they are going to license you. There is a test you have to take for both licensing bodies in order for you to get licensed in the UAE. Actually, let me rewind. The CDA does not require you to have 2 years postgraduate experience. At least they didn't until recently. They might change their tune, but up until recently, you can graduate with a master's degree from, let's just say, South Africa. You do not need to work in South Africa. You can fly here with a counseling degree and you can get a license in the UAE. You cannot do that with a clinical psychology degree from South Africa because the DHA actually licenses that. So it is a little bit fragmented, and it is a little bit like, okay, well, which body am I gonna get lucky with this, right? And so it can get a little bit tricky. Now the DHCC, like I said, have their own separate rules, but one of the rules that I'm pretty sure about when it comes to the DHCC is that if you are licensed in your home country to practice, so for example, I know somebody who is licensed, or they can see clients with a postgraduate diploma from the UK in Freudian psychoanalysis. They can see clients in the UK and they have some BPS or BP something or another, where they actually are qualified. They can practice in DHCC. So if I have my license from the United States, I can have my license in DHCC. So there is a little bit of reciprocity going on there, that if you're good enough for them, you're good enough for us. And that's kind of how they're looking at it. So DHCC is probably the most flexible out of all places that you can practice in when it comes to Dubai. Like I said, there are tests you have to take, and they're all written tests, and you can imagine, and there are companies that actually help you with test materials. So they will give you some testing materials, but it really is very much about, you know, psychology 101 and maybe psychology 102, at least when it comes to the psychology tests that you would need to take. And so let's see. I think that's it. I think for psychiatrists, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Dax, if you can just tell them, you had to go through an oral exam, right?
No.
Okay. Okay.
I actually, because it was a very complicated process, and I do know a little bit about DHCC because years ago, prior to going to China, I was thinking about working in DHCC, but then went to China, and I knew from that time it wouldn't be a very easy process. So I just hired organizations to essentially do everything for me. My degrees were recognized. I simply submitted all degrees I was asked to submit from the US, from the UK and Germany, the latter of course in translation, and then I became licensed. So it was actually a fairly easy process for me. There weren't any questions I was asked, there wasn't any examination I had to do, there was no oral examination, nothing at all.
So I think, Dr. Dax, that also might be because you're a consultant level and you have multiple board degrees from different parts of the world. And so I think that's not the case for every psychiatrist. Especially, I think there are people who do have to sit within, and I know that for a fact, but you have you're quite senior in that sense. So maybe you bypass that because of that. So those are the DHA and the CDA requirements. Now, I know a lot of you guys have questions about the internship. So we are going to move into that for the next 15 minutes. And guys, we're going to try to summarize some of these questions and put them on Lighthouse Insight stories over the next many weeks. So please go ahead and follow that account, because there's no way, we have over 100 questions and some of them are repeat, and a lot of them are about licensing, and a lot of them are about volunteer internship opportunities in the UAE. But then there are some things that we're missing because we're trying to answer all of your questions along the way. But if we don't answer, please write us on, direct message us your question, copy paste it into your Instagram right now and send it to us on Lighthouse Insight, and we promise you we will get to it. Oh, there we go. Oh, never mind. There we go.
Okay, thanks, Saliha. But can I just quickly just mention, before I talk about the internship program, just a little bit about licensing as a neuropsychologist, or if you have a dual training, as I did. Just like sort of Dr. Dax's experience, it can be very complex. And one of the things you have to keep in mind is that whatever title you're wishing to get licensed for, all of your job titles, all of the titles of your jobs that you have done have to have the words clinical psychologist or clinical neuropsychologist in the job title. You have to have full-time experience in those over the course of the 2 years that you would need to be eligible, and all of those jobs have to have that title. And that's one of the things that can trip people up quite a lot. So it's quite important that if you, in one job, just work as a neuropsychologist, even though you worked with clinical psychology skills, you just have to make sure that those 2 years qualify you for that particular title. And the clinical neuropsychology licensing involves an oral exam, which is, it's not written on any websites anywhere. You will only discover that when you go through the process. And the examination for clinical psychologists at the moment is an online exam that you do in a testing center in Dubai. So that, just wanted to share that with you really quickly. So how to get involved? So many questions are coming through about how to get experience, whether there are programs in the UAE that are accredited that would be accepted by international universities that you're wishing to apply for. So as far, and Saliha, please correct me if I'm wrong, or anyone else on the panel, but as far as I'm aware, there aren't any accredited, or maybe there are only a couple of accredited internship programs in the UAE. The question is, it is a very individual process as to what the university you're applying for will view as accredited in their eyes. So a lot of people are asking whether the Lighthouse internship program is accredited, and it is not. It is an academic internship. It is not an internship where you will get client face-to-face experience. It's really important that that is something people know about, because a lot of times people think of internship, they think of like a master's internship. So if you were to want to get experience to get into a master's program, it's really important that you consider research roles as ways of getting that kind of experience. Any individual wanting to get experience into a postdoctorate qualification in any country can only do so if they are licensed as a provisional psychologist with the licensing body in that country. Now, in order to be licensed as a provisional psychologist, especially as far as I'm aware in Australia, you have to have been accepted into a doctorate program or a master's program, and the university has to send a message essentially to the licensing body to say, we have a student, he or she is going to be seeing clients in the as part of their training program, and this is necessary for them to be able to do that, so then they get provisionally licensed. Once you graduate from your degree, then you become generally licensed, and when you have the endorsements in those specific fields, you can be endorsed as a clinical psychologist or a neuropsychologist or any other endorsement. Now, our internship program is an academic internship program that runs for 10 months. So it starts the beginning of September and it ends around July time, just around the beginning of summer. So how to know if you're eligible, a lot of questions about whether it's open to teenagers. There is no age limit, but we don't offer the academic internship program to teenagers because it is essentially the equivalent of a part-time job, and if you are in high school you won't have the capacity to do it. We also are primarily directing our applicants or highlighting applicants who are bachelor level, especially if they're bachelor level psychology students, and even better if you've already completed your undergraduate degree in psychology. The reason being is that we, as a clinic, we want your commitment, and we want to know that you're able to give that 20 hours a week, basically essentially a part-time job to the clinic. So for your experience, and also for what we would expect of you in that. So a lot of questions are asking if they can study and at the same time yes, you can, but we would very much need to know whether you have that time capacity to do that, because we do need flexibility. But that can be discussed if you do get through to the interview process. We have had a huge influx of applications that have come through. And in order to manage that, we are asking people who are still interested, because we've been receiving them throughout the year, to resend their applications through during a particular time frame, which would be in April or May. But I will, that information is going on to our Instagram accounts shortly, so you will get more specific details around how to apply. Essentially, we're looking for a cover letter and a CV, and we're really looking for individuals who are passionate about a career in psychology. Somebody who is really keen to learn, is open, and is looking to learn about every aspect of being a psychologist, not just about doing therapy and what that means, but also being able to understand the inner workings of a clinic, how we work as a multidisciplinary team, how psychiatrists work, how clinical social workers work, how OTs and speech and language therapists work, and how we can collaborate together in the field. So that is something that we are that we find very important in applicants. There is a job shadow program that will be running during spring break, which is directed for students who are in year 11 and year 12. It's going over spring break, and it's across the 2 weeks, but it's only open to 10 applicants. So those applicants would either be allocated to week 1 or week 2, and it will be a primarily in-person internship. Everyone will, of course, have to follow all the social distancing and, requirements around, what's the word I'm looking for? Making sure we don't transmit the virus is what I'm trying to say, in case you haven't. So we have rules and regulations at the clinic, and you would have to abide by those, but we do want to give students the opportunity of actually coming in to seeing what the lighthouse looks like and how, what the setup is. All of those things are actually really quite critical into understanding what a day in the life of a psychologist looks like. We have volunteer opportunities, but we would often encourage people who are interested in volunteering to tell us specifically what they're interested in volunteering for. So we often have our annual Wellbeing Day, which runs in January, which unfortunately we couldn't run this year because of the pandemic, and would hopefully maybe be running it next year again. So we often have students who are high school students, university students who want to volunteer for specific things that we run at the clinic. So if you're interested in that, please do email us, and we will let you know what we're seeking volunteers for. And also please share with us what your passions are and what your interests are, and we can see if we can accommodate that from the perspective of volunteering. Any more questions? Let me just try to check if there are any other specific questions.
Can I just say one thing? Because there's a couple questions about, can I do the internship via Zoom? No, we're not doing that right now. And I would, there's also another question that was asked, can you get licensed if you have an online degree? No, the UAE is currently, well, I should say UAE, the CDA and the DHA are currently not licensing people that have any online degrees. So if you really want to practice here, I don't see that changing anytime within the next few years. Maybe in the future it might change post-COVID, who knows, anything is possible. But as of right now, if you go into a online program, you will not get licensed. Another person asked, is the internship paid? The internship is not paid. We are giving of our time and of our energy and of our coaching, and most internships are not paid because of that reason. And so I just wanted to mention those few questions.
And just to add to that, Saliha, really quickly, with the internship involves three rotations. So each individual will get an opportunity to express what they're interested in, what population they would see themselves working with in the future, and then be allocated to a senior clinician at the Lighthouse, and they will work primarily with them for that 3-month rotation. Once that rotation is over, of course, that involves the supervisor rating their performance, but also the intern giving feedback as to what their needs are and whether those needs are being being met and how we can accommodate that. And then if they're interested in something else, they get an opportunity. So those interested in assessment would work with me. Then those interested in MHFA would then be allocated to Farah. We also have those who might be interested specifically in social media content and things like that, and parenting, and they might work with Christine on the Smart Heart board game and various other social media content that we provide for child and adolescents with Dr. Kat. So there are so many different people that you could be allocated to, and you would get a real breadth of experience through the internship. But I will say that we don't take a huge number of applicants, so it is very competitive. And if you are interested, please do make sure that you send your applications through during that date, and please make sure that you're available for the interview when we contact you. Not everybody will be contacted for an interview, and unfortunately that is just based on the demand, and we have to give it to those who meet our criteria. So you need to have a UAE residency visa, and you need ideally be in your final stages or have already completed a bachelor's degree, and even better if it is one in psychology. Farah, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, so we really love our interns, and it is the most competitive internship to get in. We get hundreds and if not thousands applicants throughout the year. Some things you can do to make yourself more competitive to stand out is make sure your CV has a cover letter, and also that you take a mental health first aid course. That really helps as well. If you have assessment experience, please make sure you include that as well.
I've just received a quick question about how many interns we accept. It depends. We currently have 9 interns with us, but we often will only have space for maximum 10, I would say, at this point.
Christine, did you see any questions? Or Catherine, did you see any questions? If not, then we can just wrap it up because we're at the seventh hour. So
I was absorbed in the questions, so I may have missed it, but did you talk about the job shadowing opportunity? Because there are some people you did. Okay, all right. Just for people who perhaps can't participate in the internship.
Yes, and if you, Saliha, if you just move over a couple of slides, you will see the posters for the different programs that we have running. The Job Shadow program, as I've said there, and that is also on our Instagram accounts, and the academic internship, which is the part-time unpaid 10-month program. And any interested applicants, if you have any questions, please email us on intern@lighthousearabia.com, and we will also remind you of the date of application, that window for applications, and when we will be running the interviews. Thank you.
okay, I mean, that was, any other things you guys want to add? Christine, Dr. Dax, Farah, Kat, anything else?
Go into a career into psychology. That's all I have to say.
Farah, someone asked if mental health first aid can be completed online. So can I ask you to speak about mental health first aid as to what it is, because that might give them some skills under their belt that might actually even help them in their college applications. So if you could just speak a little bit about that.
So mental health first aid is an international program. It's evidence-based. It's in 26 countries worldwide, and it's the equivalent to physical first aid, but for mental health. So you learn how to identify and respond to someone who may be struggling with depression, anxiety, or addiction. You also learn how to identify and respond to mental health crises like suicidal thoughts or behaviors, a panic attack, the after effects of trauma, or the severe effects of addiction or substance abuse. You do not learn how to you don't learn how to counsel or diagnose someone, but you are learning very practical response skills, what to say, what not to say, and what local resources are available. So you can learn more about the program on our social media or on our website. It is a 10-hour program, adult to adult or adult to adolescent. We also have a 4-hour teen to teen program. You can find out more on our social media or on our website. It is online right now.
Great. So yes, it is online and we have it every month. We run these every month. And so we have them for high school students and then we have them for 18 and above. So I really recommend that you guys check that out. Catherine, I have one question, and then Christine, I have one question, and then Australia. Rebecca, I have one question. For you guys, just a yes or a no would be fine. Do you need, in the UK, a 4-year bachelor's in order to get into the master's and doctorate?
No, 3 years.
It's a 3-year master's. Christine, do you need a 4 years bachelor's to get into a master's program in South Africa?
Some universities do the BPsych, which is a 4-year honors equivalent, but you will, if you don't do the BPsych, you will need to do an honors in order to get in for the master's. 2
years, 4 years?
Pardon?
How many years is that?
The honors is 1 year. So you do a 3-year undergrad, bachelor's in psychology, and then you do 1 year honors, and then you can apply for masters.
Okay, so it ends up being 4 years, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in South Africa, you need 4 years. What about Australia?
4 years. You have to do an honors program.
So we don't call them honors. We just call it a straight up undergraduate degree in the United States. And yes, you need one. You need 4 years in the United States also. Do you know in Germany about psychology, Dax?
No, unfortunately, I don't.
Okay. So basically everybody needs 4 years except for UK, they need 3 years. So that was one question that people kept asking, 3 or 4 year, and it's a little bit confusing. Guys, I would really also encourage you to contact your school counselors if you don't have school counselors. And I actually would like to say that there was a couple people, and then I'm going to log off because in 2 minutes, there were a couple people who said, I went and did my law degree and I went and did my, HR degree and I did this one and that one. I think it would really be important to know that I don't know about the rest of the world, but in the United States, at least, they encourage people to get these degrees even late in life. And so if there is a pathway that you have done and you're 30 something or you're 40 something, it's never too late to change that. There's many people who do that, when they're going through their sort of middle passage and they realize that what they've been doing is not what is their soul calling. As obviously you guys have all seen in all of our tone and all of our language and all of our ways that we've talked about this, that this is truly our calling, and we don't feel like we're working. We feel like we are giving our heart and soul to our community, to our clients, to ourselves every time we show up. And so if that is really what inspires you, then I think it doesn't matter how old you are. So unless in the UK they have an age limit, because the UK apparently has a different way of doing things. Catherine, can I be a 35-year-old and join the UK program? I can. Okay, good. All right.
Sorry, Kat.
Go.
No, go.
I was just going to say, you absolutely can. I don't mean to scare everyone from the way that they do it over there. Like you could get on immediately from your undergrad. So don't let that put you off. But I think there is a competitive element, and you want to show that you really care and you're really passionate. So as long as you can do that, there isn't like a set number of years or experience that you need. So you can.
Yes.
I wanted to say in our master's year, we had a 56-year-old lady who was part of the 9 master's students who did their course together, and she actually ended up passing with distinction, and today she still practices.
Yep, there we go. So to all the middle-aged women like us, or me at least, I don't know about you spring chickens, but like us, it's never too late, guys. So these are, I just put up a screen for all of you guys. You can take a snapshot of this. These are all the different channels that we have at the Lighthouse. And like I said, this recording will be on live. So if you subscribe to the Lighthouse YouTube channel, you will get a message when that is also uploaded. Like I said, if you have any other questions about internship, you know where to go. It's Dr. Rebecca. You have any other questions about any of these degrees and programs, Lighthouse Insight is the account you want to message. Don't message Lighthouse Arabia, Lighthouse Insight, because we are actually catering to this crowd there. All right, guys, thank you all for being here. Thank you, panel. I love you guys, and I will see you all next time. And when we do the next panel with occupational therapy and speech and language therapy, etc. So we'll do a little bit about that next time. See you guys. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.